Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be getting back into the original Gen 13 miniseries with Gen 13 number 3. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in April of 1994, we can see here on the front cover our old pal Pitt, who is making yet another cameo appearance in an early Image title. And I honestly think that Pitt might actually be the most featured character in all of the Image universe, at least for like the first few years, in terms of how many times he showed up in other creators' books, which I'm fine with. I'm a huge fan of Pitt, and it's fun. It's always fun to see him in a different title. And it looks here on the cover like he is doing battle with the entirety of the Gen 13 team. However, that's not really what takes place in this story, and it is a little bit misleading to see this image and believe that this is what's happening. I really feel like this could have been drawn a different way. I mean, it looks fantastic. J. Scott Campbell did a terrific job, but it's not really indicative of how things play out in the story, and you're going to see that once we get inside. Story: Jim Lee, J. Scott Campbell, and Brandon Choi. Pencils: J. Scott Campbell. Inks: Alex Garner. Letters: Ken Lopez. Colors: Joe Chiodo. Color separations: Wildstorm Effects. Letter page editor: Jeff Mariotti. Assistant editor: Sarah Becker. Editor-in-chief: Bill Kaplan. Color assist: Monica Benet, Wendy Fouts, and Linda Medley. Ink assist: Sandra Hope. Production: Wildstorm Effects. Holy crap, that is a boatload of people that worked on this issue. I'm shocked. Like, it really is surprising that Jim Lee was paying this many people to produce one issue of a comic book. And I don't know, maybe it takes that many people, but it feels like maybe it shouldn't. Meanwhile, back in the story, we see that Fairchild has made her way back to the Genesis facility and is scoping out the facility with a pair of binoculars, trying to figure out a way to break in so that she can rescue her friends, who were all captured by Threshold, who for some reason let Fairchild escape, and it doesn't really make much sense that he would do that, especially considering she's Gen active, and the whole purpose of everything they're doing at the Genesis facility is to produce more Gen active subjects that they can use in their superhuman military project. But for whatever reason, he let her go, and now she's trying to save her friends. In scoping out the facility, she happens to see a convoy that is making its way to the facility, which she believes is carrying another group of volunteers who are going to be subjected to Project Genesis and possibly become Gen active themselves. She then starts to question the wisdom of her choice to come back and try and save her friends, stating that she should probably be running away, trying to get as far away from this place as she can, but she feels a responsibility in trying to save the people that she spent the last month living amongst, and believes that, it's her duty to help her friends. Meanwhile, as the convoy reaches the front of the facility, they're immediately denied access by the gatehouse. However, the leader of the Black Razor assault team that this convoy belongs to quickly rattles off a special authorization code and states that the gate officer will allow them into the facility, or he's going to be shipped off to Antarctica in the morning. And the gate officer agrees because he realizes that A, the code is legit, and B, whoever he's dealing with inside of this truck is someone that he should not be crossing. In another part of the facility, we see Ivana, the head of the Genesis facility, being awoken in the middle of the night to be told that there are unexpected guests in the facility. She, of course, is none too happy to hear this as she grabs a robe and walks out the door. Meanwhile, back in the entry bay, the crate carrying none other than Pitt is being offloaded by the Black Razor assault team. As Ivana walks down the hallway, she wants to know exactly why these people were let in, and the man that works directly underneath her states that they had the proper authorization code and that there was nothing he could do. As they reach the loading dock, they see that the Black Razor assault team is shocking Pitt inside of his crate, trying to subdue him. And I will say, I really like the fact that they took the time to make sure that they used the exact same type of speech bubbles for Pitt in this comic as are used in the actual Pitt ongoing series comic. And if you'd like to know more about Pitt, you can feel free to check out my Pitt playlist. But I thought that was a really cool attention to detail that they paid right there, and am really happy that they did so. Ivana then wonders, what's going on here? She demands to know who's in charge, and then the door to the truck opens and a familiar face steps out, which shocks her to see that it is in fact Lynch, who has arrived with this superpowered being that he captured. And he states that protocol states that when transporting a superpowered being of this magnitude, they're required to stop at a IO facility to store that being for the night when they all sleep. And that seems reasonable, especially when you're dealing with someone as powerful as Pitt. Ivana, while unhappy about it, does realize that her hands are tied in this matter, and states that Lynch can in fact come in with the Black Razor assault team, store Pitt here for the evening, but that she's not happy about it, and that he is 100% Lynch's responsibility as she storms off back to bed. We then see a close-up of Pitt's face from inside of the crate as he once again snarls and lets everyone know that he's not too pleased about the situation. However, back outside, we are joined back up with Caitlin Fairchild as she has used the commotion of this unexpected convoy entering the facility to her advantage and has managed to sneak inside and is now just looking for a way through the doors. She, of course, is still armed with the ridiculous nonsensical space gun that she was able to procure at the end of issue number 2, which, I don't know, maybe it's supposed to be Gamoran tech. It definitely looks like something ripped straight out of the pages of Cybernary. But she states that this is her chance as she begins her assault on the facility. She comes across a guard who makes his report stating that the area he's in is all clear. And after he makes said report, she puts the barrel of her gun directly to the back of his head and tells him to freeze and that she is willing to hurt him if she has to. However, before she can make good on this threat, she has a gun pointed to the back of her head by a member of the Black Razor assault team, who tells her to put the gun down. However, she thinks quick and acts even quicker as she pushes the first man and leans back and kicks the member of the Black Razor assault team. She then uses her gun to smack the original guard straight across the face and then realizes that she's not necessarily accounting for how much stronger she is now and is a little bit worried about how badly she may have just hurt these two men who, despite the fact that either one of them would kill her at the drop of the hat, she is actually, genuinely concerned about whether or not she's done something like that to them, as she doesn't necessarily want to result to, killing her enemies and is, genuinely trying to harm them as little as possible in her quest to save her friends. Fairchild takes a moment to check on the well-being of both of the soldiers that she's knocked out, making sure that they still have a pulse. And after realizing that the two of them are still alive, she breathes a sigh of relief. She then realizes that the uniform of the Black Razor assault team member is really not damaged at all and looks as though it will fit her, which I find a little bit surprising. To be fair, they never really say exactly how big Caitlin Fairchild is in these early issues, but it's kind of presented that she's like between 6 and 7 feet tall. So unless the guy that she just knocked out is a relatively big dude, his uniform wouldn't really fit her. And who knows, maybe he is. But I feel like they haven't really nailed the, size that Caitlin is supposed to be quite yet. And, it tends to change a little bit depending on what panel she's in or what situation she's in terms of, how big she needs to be to work in the story. Meanwhile, back in the central command of the Genesis facility, we are joined once again by Lynch and Ivana, who are having a bit of a disagreement. Lynch is rather upset about the way that all of the kids in the Gen 13 program are being treated and believes that this is rather barbaric and unnecessary. Ivana says that Lynch is going soft, that he's seen way worse than this and done worse than this himself. But Lynch pushes back, stating that, he never took joy in any of that. And, despite the fact that he's done some terrible things, it's not because he's trying to be a terrible person. He did what was necessary for the situation at hand, and he truly believes that Ivana's taking this way too far. However, she states that Threshold knows exactly what he's doing, and that if anyone's going to bring out the powers that may be lying dormant in Grunge, it's him. And this is where the story gets a little bit funky, because we then go to the room where, Threshold is trying to activate Grunge's powers, which apparently involves stripping him naked and hanging him upside down from the ceiling, and also stripping the other members of the team naked for reasons that are never explained, other than they were trying to sell this comic to 13-year-old boys, I suppose. But these 3 members of the team are already Gen active. There's no reason for them to be here in this lab along with Grunge. Now, I should point out that their powers are all being nullified by the shackles that they're in, which is allowing Threshold to basically go about his business uninterrupted. He continues to taunt Grunge, stating that, he really expected more out of him. But Grunge comes back with a quip of his own, stating, "Hey, my teachers did always say that I was an underachiever." Threshold then gets a little bit annoyed by Grunge talking back to him, and states that he's going to make sure that Grunge activates his powers, or that Grunge dies in the process. We then see the rest of the team looking on, worried about their friend, as Threshold activates his own powers and starts to, I guess, electrocute Grunge in an attempt to bring him to the verge of death, which would potentially activate his powers, I guess, is how that works, is what we're supposed to believe. I don't know if that's exactly how that works, because it wasn't necessarily the way it worked for the rest of the team, so I don't know. It seems like maybe they're grasping at straws. Meanwhile, in another part of the Genesis facility, we come to a cell that houses Timmy, who was taken by the government from his grandfather because they detected abnormalities in his genes and believe that he may be actually a Gen active youth. He's huddled up in the corner of his cell, which is kind of funny because Timmy's, supposed to be, I think, around like 10 years old. They have a Barney poster on the wall, but Beavis and Butthead playing on the television. So here's one thing that he's way too old to be into, and another thing that he's probably too young to be into. It's like all over the place. I think it was just J. Scott Campbell being like, hey, these are 2 relevant pop culture things that young people are into right now. I'll put them in the book. As the door opens, it, scares Timmy as he states, "Who are you?" as he sees a Black Razor assault team member enter. However, it's not a Black Razor assault team member. It's instead Fairchild in disguise. She quickly takes off her helmet, states who she is, and says that she's here to help Timmy escape. She then asks his name. He introduces himself. She tells him hers, and she then states that the 2 of them are going to get out of here, and she's also going to make sure that he gets back to his family. And Timmy looks pretty relieved to have met her. The only problem I have with any of this is that it doesn't necessarily fall in line with the story from Pit. As we've seen in Pit number 4, the Chakran child leaves Pit's consciousness and then enters Timmy's consciousness to both save Timmy and also give Timmy powers. In this issue, Timmy has no powers, and the Chakran child is still living within Pit's consciousness. So this issue takes place before Pit number 4. However, there's really no point in the story of Pit 1 through 3 where Timmy could have been kidnapped by, government officials and taken to this facility without anyone noticing or without any protest, especially given the amount of police presence that was around his house after Pit was fighting with the alien bounty hunters. There's a lot of this that seems like it doesn't really work, and I wish it did, but the more you look at it, the more it seems like they're just kind of slamming these two characters two characters into Gen 13 to try and bolster sales without really considering whether or not it makes sense from a story standpoint. Meanwhile, in the containment portion of the facility, we see that Pitt is in the process of being taunted by none other than Nicole, who is Threshold's sister and also goes by the super villain name of Bliss. She apparently has the powers of telekinesis and is using them to dangle keys in front of Pitt's face, telling him to grab them, but then snatching them away every time he does. This, of course, is making him quite furious. However, the chakran child tells him to control himself because Timmy is near and he's the whole reason that they're here in the first place, which infers that Pitt allowed himself to be captured so he could potentially find Timmy. However, there was no way for him to necessarily know that this is exactly where they would take him, or if Timmy would be here when he got here, so it seems like he was kind of grasping at straws. Meanwhile, Bliss continues to speak down to Pitt, just taunting him, insulting him, and just having a laugh at his expense, which we see is continuing to enrage him. As she leaves the containment facility, she is seen exiting by Fairchild and Timmy, who are trying to sneak around inside of the facility and find the rest of the Gen 13 members. They hide behind a wall and just kind of gawk and, try to get an idea of when a good time to move would be and, eavesdrop on her conversation. However, as they try to move, Nicole, aka Bliss, absolutely notices them, turns around immediately and realizes that Fairchild is back in the facility and wastes no time in unleashing a psionic attack on both her and Timmy. This blasts the Black Razor assault team uniform right off of Fairchild. However, it doesn't affect her uniform underneath. Maybe it's made out of some super material. Also, it doesn't seem to have any effect on Timmy's clothing, which just seemed to be a normal t-shirt and jeans. However, when Timmy is also faced with this attack, he panics and screams out Pitt's name, which Pitt automatically hears even though he's on the other side of the wall and senses that Timmy is in danger. We then get this 2-page vertical spread, thanks a lot, Jay, where we see Pitt break the chains that are binding him, break out of his cell, and then smash directly through the wall that is dividing the two rooms between him and Timmy, showing that he was never really captured in the first place. He was just playing possum and allowing himself to be imprisoned so that he could find Timmy. This, of course, is a shock to Bliss as she can't believe that he was able to break free of the containment unit, as we see him coming out of the wall saying, where is Timmy? I want Timmy right now. Bliss yells out at the guard that's with her to open fire on Pitt, as we see Fairchild on the ground, and she's rather dazed and not really sure of what's going on around her, as she's still trying to shake off the after effects of the attack that Bliss levied against her. Pitt then turns to see Bliss and states, "Don't make me angry, you wouldn't like me when I'm angry," as a reference to the Incredible Hulk. And Bliss is like, "Oh, come on, you're not still mad about all that stuff with the keys, are you?" She then starts to backpedal as she realizes that she's in real danger if he was able to just blast through all of the containment facilities, walls and bars and chains. As she continues to back away, she has the presence of mind to quickly hit a button that closes some, blast shield doors between her and Pitt, as she and her boy toy escort make their escape. Pitt then turns around as the chakran child says that he's located Timmy, who is unconscious but okay. However, Pitt is rather distraught to see his friend/brother unconscious and lying on the floor, as he rushes to his aid, and Caitlin starts to get up, but she believes that Pitt is trying to harm Timmy and thinks that she has to come to his rescue. Also, I am a little, disappointed that they kind of got the size scaling wrong on Pitt in this issue. They draw him to be around 7 feet tall, when in reality, Dale draws him to be more like 10 to 12 feet tall in all the issues of Pitt. So, I get it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but still, like, it's pretty established at this point, exactly how big Pitt is and how he just towers over everyone. And the fact that he's only slightly bigger than normal people in this issue, I feel is kind of like not doing the character justice. But, that's just my opinion. We then see that there is a Gen 13 pinup by Dan Norton and Chuck Gibson, which looks like this. We see here that it's okay. I mean, there's nothing really special going on here. It's just a generic picture of the team. And, the artwork's fine, but it's not anything to write home about. I will, give credit where credit's due. They at least were nice enough to make this the centerfold of the book, so you could pull this out and hang it on your wall if you wanted to, without just completely destroying the rest of the comic book. And, as simple as a concept as that seems, not everybody was doing it. So, shout out to Jim Lee and the rest of the crew at Wildstorm for thinking ahead a little bit. We then see an advertisement for Wildcats, the animated series on CBS. We've talked about this in other issues, and there is a Wildcats animated series comic book tie-in called Wildcats Adventures. I have some of the issues of that. I don't think I have all of them, but I will make videos about those at some point or another. I'm going to try and probably get my hands on all of them before I start, but it will come. It might be years from now, folks, but it will come. Meanwhile, back in the story, we see Caitlin as she turns around and screams at Pitt to get away from Timmy, or he's going to answer to her. She then lunges into action as she tackles Pitt, hitting him in the mid-torso, smashing him back into the wall behind him, crushing into the concrete, breaking through it as Pitt is hit by a huge attack. However, unfortunately for Caitlin, she's never encountered someone who is as physically powerful as Pitt before, and this attack does very little to him, and he in fact recovers quickly and returns the attack, with an attack of his own, namely an uppercut, which sends her flying back through the air. As, he then yells at the Chakran Child, who says something's not right here, and tells the Chakran Child to shut up, that he's got more pressing matters to deal with. Pitt then grabs Fairchild by the throat and picks her up. She is then confronted with the fact that despite all of her strength, Pitt is much stronger than her, and she's not capable of freeing herself from his grasp. He then starts to question, what manner of creature this is, that the females of Earth are not supposed to be this strong. And then the Chakran Child breaks in and says, something's unusual about her genetic makeup. Pitt, however, misunderstands what he's saying and believes that he's being told that Fairchild is perhaps another Creed hybrid bounty hunter. But he then states that doesn't make sense, as the females of planet Earth are the weaker sex. This, however, doesn't sit well with Caitlin, as she says, "I'll show you weak," as she then proceeds to take Pitt to Dick Kick City, as Brian Zane would put it. This, of course, is enough to break his grasp, as despite the fact that Pitt is incredibly powerful, he just got kicked in the balls by someone else who has a very high level of super strength. Caitlin wastes no time in capitalizing on the attack, as she then grabs him by the head and knees him in the throat, and then picks him up over her head in a press slam and says, "Get ready to go for a ride." And at this point, the Chakran Child states that her genetic makeup doesn't match up to any Creed DNA and that she's quite different. However, Pitt is actually kind of irritated with the Chakran Child at this point and basically just tells him to shut up, because he's really more concerned about the fight that he's in the middle of. Caitlin then chucks Pitt across the room like a sack of potatoes as he hits the ground with a thud. He then says that does it, as we see him begin to extend his claws. The Chakran Child tries to reason with Pitt, stating, hey, maybe you should actually open a dialogue with this woman and talk things out. However, Pitt says, no chance, we're doing things my way, Chakran. Meanwhile, back in the lab, we see that Threshold is still in the middle of trying to unlock Grunge's gen active powers through torture, as he once again ignites his own powers in his hand and touches his hand to Grunge's forehead and unleashes a torrent, stating that either his powers are going to activate or he's going to die. This is enough to send Roxy into a bit of a panic as we see tears starting to stream down her face. She yells out at Threshold to leave Grunge alone, and that if he ends up killing Grunge, she's going to make sure that he pays for this. And we see that, she's really, really upset and really, fully believing that Grunge could die here and that she might lose someone that she genuinely cares about. Threshold then turns to Roxy and says, "Oh my gosh, I'm so afraid," as he uses his powers to then grab her by the throat and lift her up, showing that, he can shock people, but also use his powers for telekinetic purposes. I'm not certain if he has the exact same powers as his sister, but it seems as though, they're pretty similar, if not entirely identical, depending on what her abilities are. He then is choking Roxy, trying to strangle her. This, of course, enrages Grunge as he believes that Roxy's in real danger. He then is able to manifest his own Gen active powers as we see him start to absorb the metal of his shackles, break through them, and yell at Threshold stating, "Hey, back off." And as Threshold says, "What are you going to do about it?" he realizes that he was overly confident as Grunge lunges forward and knocks Threshold out in one punch with his now metallized arm. And we realize that Grunge is essentially just absorbing man from Marvel Comics. I mean, not 100% the same, but pretty freaking close, man. After Threshold loses consciousness, Roxy falls to the floor, and Grunge rushes to her aid, really afraid that something's wrong with her. However, she's fine, and she jumps up and hugs Grunge, happy that he's okay and thankful that he came to her aid. She also states that she always knew he was Gen active and always believed that he would be able to make his powers, come to life, and she can't believe that he would do so just to save her. This, of course, is making Grunge blush, probably due to the fact that he's not used to having beautiful naked women hug him when he's also naked. And he's like, "Hey, I would have done this for anybody." Meanwhile, we should probably get dressed and get out of here. So they do, and exit the room they're in into the hallway and realize that they need to figure out an escape plan and get out of the Genesis facility as fast as possible as they see the alarm begin to sound. Meanwhile, back on Sublevel 10, we see Ivana and Lynch, who are monitoring the situation, as one of the men on the computer states that the fight is moving closer and closer to them, and then suddenly states, "Brace for impact." Ivana believes this is impossible until Pitt and Fairchild crash through the ceiling and land on the floor in front of them. Lynch is shocked to see the superpowered being that he thought was contained, that he brought in the middle of a battle with Fairchild right before their feet. At this point, all of the guards in the facility that are in this room point their guns directly at Fairchild and Pitt. Ivana states, "Lynch, this is your mess. Why don't you clean it up?" And Lynch states, "All right, men, get ready to fire, and we're going to kill both of these beings." Pitt then realizes that maybe he was not fighting a battle against someone who was an adversary, as Caitlin does as well, believing that, they've both made a mistake and that perhaps they're on the same team. However, Lynch is not in the mood to let the two of these formulate a plan, as he states, "All right, men, get ready to fire." And we see that this issue is to be this story is to be continued in the next issue. We then see an ad for the first set of Wildstorm trading cards, which are being produced in Chromium. This wouldn't bother me, except for the fact that it's being done on trading cards. Trading cards, when done in Chromium, in my opinion, don't look that great. Chromium tends to take away some of the detail of the artwork a lot of times, and it's fine for a cover once in a while, but when you're doing it on something as small as a trading card, it tends to look a little bit sloppy. I mean, it's really shiny, but the artwork doesn't look that great. And I say that as someone who owns a full set of the Cyberforce trading cards, which are all chromium as well. And, I get it. They're cyborgs. It's cool that they're shiny and all. And I do really like Cyberforce. That's why I bought the cards. But that being said, they don't look fantastic. And I have a feeling that these Wildstorm cards probably don't look super fantastic either. Now, I am just guessing. I've never had my hands on any of them. I've never seen them in person. So maybe I'm totally wrong. And if I am, that's great. But it's been my experience that chromium trading cards tend to not be that awesome. We then reach the letter section, which is now called Talking About My Generation, which is a really clever title that a reader came up with and was rewarded with a Gen 13 ash can that was autographed. The letter section is mostly answered by Jeff Mariotti. None of these letters are super in-depth in terms of what they're saying. It's mostly just people talking about how much they love Gen 13, asking, really generic, basic questions. But there was one that I found kind of interesting, especially as it pertains to something I brought up earlier in the book. There was one letter specifically in which one of the readers asked exactly how much Caitlin grew when her Gen powers became active. Now, Jeff responds by saying that he doesn't have specifics, but it does look like she grew a good 2 to 3 feet. And that's where I have a bit of a problem. Because, before, if Fairchild was an average height woman of, 5 to 5.5 feet tall, that means that she would be at minimum now 7 to 7.5 feet tall, or at maximum 8 to 8.5 feet tall, which she's clearly not depicted as being in this issue. We see her standing eye to eye with the normal soldiers that she knocked out in the early part of the book, which would put her more like 6 to 6.5 feet tall. And, it's one of those things where, like, I understand there's artistic license and all that kind of stuff, but, like, if you're going to make Caitlin Fairchild the de facto quote-unquote She-Hulk of the image shared universe that existed at this time, then she needs to be that imposing figure, and you need to make a conscious effort to try and keep her size pretty standard throughout all of the issues, at least in my opinion. Again, some people don't share that, but, when you're going to make a statement like this in the book and state, oh yeah, she's like this much taller, try to stick to it. Try to be consistent. There is then a promotional mail away to get your own Gen 13 ash can. However, this one will not be autographed by the team, by filling out this mail away form and sending off for it, which is cool. I've never come across one of these in the wild, but if I did, I'd probably buy it. I have a few image ash cans, and they're neat little collectible things to have, and typically they're not all that expensive either. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Team Youngblood number 9. Now, I haven't actually done any videos on issues of Team Youngblood as of my recording this video. However, I have recorded several videos about the standard normal Youngblood series, and if you'd like to check any of those out, you can find them in my Youngblood playlist. And that was Gen 13 number 3, and it's a comic book. I say that, it's not a bad comic book, but it's not a great comic book either. It looks beautiful. J. Scott Campbell's artwork is terrific, but there's a lot of weird plot holes in the story. First and foremost, it never made sense that Threshold let Fairchild escape in the first place, especially when the entire mission of the Genesis facility is to create Gen active youths and then use them in special operations for the U.S. government. In fact, there's even one point in this issue where Ivana says that, if these Gen active beings are not on our side, then they're completely disposable, meaning that, she didn't care if Grunge died if he wasn't going to help them. And if that's the case, why would you have let Fairchild escape? Like, you would have thought, like, she would have been really mad at Threshold for allowing Fairchild to get away. And there's also the fact that, as much as I like Pitt, his involvement in this issue makes no sense at all. The idea that Timmy would be brought in by the government to this facility, and somehow Pitt would magically figure out exactly where they took him, and then allow himself to be captured by a Black Razor assault team that I don't even know how he would have come into contact with them. And then, cross his fingers that he gets taken to the same place that Timmy's being held so that he can break him out. Like, it all just seems silly. I really believe the only reason that Pitt is existing in this issue is A, for cross promotion, but B, as a means of scaling Fairchild's powers to basically let the reader know, or give the reader a ballpark figure of exactly how strong Fairchild is in comparison to another established Image character who we already know is absurdly powerful on the strength scale. But then again, I could be wrong. And these are all just my opinions. Your opinions may be completely different. You might have thought Pitt's involvement in this was perfect and every part of the story made absolute perfect sense. And if so, that's okay, because everybody's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.